The evening sun was setting low, painting the sky in soft orange and pink colors as Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Johnson drove along the quiet highway. He had just left his parents' home, where he had spent the weekend sharing laughter, food, and stories of old times. Marcus was a disciplined man, someone who had served his country for over 20 years, but when he was with his family, he felt like a son again, not a soldier. His parents had hugged him tightly before he left, telling him to drive safe. He promised he would. For him, this drive was just another calm journey back to base. Marcus was dressed simply. He wore a clean polo shirt and jeans, not his uniform, but his posture and steady manner still showed the discipline of an officer. His car was well kept, quiet, and he drove under the speed limit. Music played softly on the radio, and for a moment, everything seemed peaceful. He thought about the tasks waiting for him the next day at the Army office. Reports, meetings, and training schedules, all the normal things that filled his life. But deep down, Marcus carried pride. Pride in wearing the uniform, pride in being a role model to young soldiers, and pride in serving a country that he believed in, even if it sometimes failed him. As he approached a small town on the edge of the highway, flashing red and blue lights suddenly appeared in his rearview mirror. He frowned slightly, confused. He knew he wasn't speeding, and his registration and license were always in order. Still, he signaled carefully and pulled over to the side of the road. His military training taught him to remain calm in every situation, even when he didn't understand it. The patrol car stopped behind him. 2 police officers stepped out. One was older, heavy-set, with a sharp look in his eyes. The other was younger, clearly following the lead of his partner. Marcus rolled down his window, placed both his hands visibly on the steering wheel, and waited. "Evening, officers," Marcus said in a respectful tone, his voice calm but firm. "Step out of the car," the older officer barked, without explanation. Marcus blinked. Normally, traffic stops began with a question or at least a request for license and registration. He tried to keep his voice steady. "May I ask what this is about, sir?" "Don't ask questions. Step out," the officer repeated, his voice louder this time. Marcus glanced briefly at the younger officer, hoping to see a more balanced expression, but the young man avoided his eyes. The colonel's instincts told him this was not a routine stop. Something deeper was happening. Still, he complied. Slowly, he unbuckled his seat belt, raised his hands where they could see, and stepped out of the car. The cool air touched his face as he stood under the fading sun. Cars passed slowly on the other side of the highway, some drivers glancing curiously. The older officer walked closer, his hand resting on his holster. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded. "I'm on my way back to base," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm an officer in the U.S. Army. Here's my identification." He carefully reached into his pocket and pulled out his military ID, holding it out for the officer to see. But instead of easing the tension, the officer's eyes narrowed. "That doesn't mean anything to me right now," he muttered. Marcus felt a small knot forming in his stomach. He had dealt with tense situations overseas, in countries where he was seen as an outsider, but never imagined that at home, in his own country, he would be treated this way while carrying proof of his service. By now, a few onlookers had begun to gather at a distance. A couple walking their dog stopped to watch. Someone across the street took out a phone and started recording. Marcus noticed but didn't react. His training told him to focus only on the moment. The younger officer finally spoke. His voice was less sharp. "Sir, do you have your license and registration as well?" "Yes, of course," Marcus said, and moved slowly to retrieve them from the glove compartment of his car. He spoke aloud as he moved, announcing every action so they wouldn't mistake his intent. "I am reaching into the glove box now. I'm taking out my wallet now. Here is my license. Registration is in the folder. The younger officer took the documents, glanced at them, and looked uncertain. Marcus could see a flicker of doubt on his face as if he realized this was more than it appeared to be. But the older officer wasn't swayed. "What were you doing before we pulled you over?" the older man pressed, his tone suspicious. "I was driving home," Marcus replied evenly. "Is there a specific reason I was stopped?" The officer didn't answer directly. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You think wearing a uniform makes you untouchable?" Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. His eyes, calm but sharp, met the officer's. "No, sir. I believe being a citizen means we all have rights. I am simply asking why I was stopped." The moment was tense. The air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. The crowd across the street grew larger, more phones were lifted into the air. A few people whispered, recognizing the words "Army Colonel." They shook their heads, their faces showing disbelief at how he was being treated. Marcus stood tall, his posture unshaken, even though inside he felt both frustration and sadness. He had served in dangerous zones overseas, commanding soldiers, protecting lives, making life and death decisions. And yet here, on a simple American street, his dignity was being challenged by men who didn't see the uniform in his heart, only the color of his skin. Still, he did not raise his voice. He did not lose his temper. He simply waited, standing with the quiet authority of a man who knew that truth was on his side. His children had always looked up to him as a man of patience and discipline. His parents had taught him that dignity was a shield stronger than anger. And his years in service had trained him that sometimes silence was the most powerful response. As the sun dipped lower, the flashing lights painted the scene in red and blue. The bystanders kept recording, murmuring about how unfair the situation seemed. Marcus knew that whatever happened next would not stay hidden. The flashing red and blue lights kept spinning on top of the patrol car, painting the evening air with uneasy colors. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Johnson stood tall on the side of the road, his calm expression hiding the storm that was beginning to grow around him. He had already handed over his license, registration, and military ID. Still, the older officer refused to back down, as if determined to prove something to the small but growing crowd of bystanders. People whispered among themselves. A woman holding a shopping bag shook her head and muttered to her friend, "That man is clearly a soldier. Why are they treating him like this?" A teenager on a bike had his phone out, recording every second. Word was already spreading quickly online, though Marcus had no idea that his quiet dignity was being live-streamed to thousands of viewers. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. He looked down at the license in his hand and then at the military ID. "Sir," he said softly, "this shows your active duty. Is that correct?" "Yes," Marcus replied in a steady voice. "Lieutenant Colonel. Stationed at Fort Bragg." He pointed to the badge clipped inside his wallet. "I've given you everything you need. Now, I'd like to know why I was stopped." Before the younger officer could respond, the older one cut in sharply. "Don't play smart with us. I don't care what you say you are. Out here, we're in charge." The words hung heavy in the air. The crowd murmured louder. Some were outraged, others were stunned. One man muttered, "This is going to be big. That's a colonel. They're going to regret this." Marcus remained calm, but inside he felt a deep ache. All his years of service, the medals he had earned, the lives he had saved, none of it seemed to matter to these men. They didn't see his dedication, his sacrifices, or his loyalty. They only saw someone they had already judged. He drew a breath and spoke in a voice that carried authority without aggression. "Officer, with all respect, I've served this country for more than 2 decades. I follow the law. I train young soldiers to respect authority, but also to uphold justice. Please, let's not turn this into something unnecessary." Tell me what I did wrong. The older officer's face tightened, as though Marcus's calmness made him angrier. He stepped even closer, invading Marcus's personal space. The younger officer looked nervous now, glancing at the crowd, aware that dozens of phones were capturing every second. He seemed torn between following his partner and doing what he knew was right. "Sir, maybe we should," the younger one began, his voice trailing off. But the older officer waved him off with a sharp hand. "No. He thinks because he's military he can challenge us. Not today." The tension grew. Marcus stood still, his hands open and visible. He wasn't a man who believed in confrontation unless absolutely necessary. He thought of his cadets back at the base, how he always taught them that discipline was not about reacting quickly, but about controlling yourself in the hardest moments. This was one of those moments. The bystanders were now openly speaking out. A woman raised her voice from across the street. "Leave him alone. He's not doing anything wrong." Another man shouted, "That's an army officer. Show some respect." The older officer ignored them, but Marcus could feel the shift in the air. The people were on his side. They saw the unfairness, and their voices carried weight. Still, the situation was dangerous in its own way. Marcus knew that sometimes, pride and authority could blind people to reason. He wanted to defuse the situation without letting his dignity be stripped away. He turned slightly toward the younger officer, addressing him directly. "Son, you look like a man who wants to do the right thing. You have my ID. You have my license. You know who I am. Please, check it on your system. You'll see the truth." The younger man hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I'll run it." He walked back toward the patrol car, holding Marcus's documents. His shoulders looked tense, as though he knew this was no longer just a traffic stop, it was something that could decide the course of his career. The older officer remained in front of Marcus, staring him down. "You think those people recording are going to save you?" he said coldly. Marcus didn't flinch. He met the man's eyes, steady and firm. "The truth saves me. It always does." The crowd cheered lightly at that statement, their support clear. The tension between the two men was sharp, but Marcus's words carried the kind of weight that came from a life of service and honor. Meanwhile, inside the patrol car, the younger officer typed in the colonel's information. His eyes widened as the system confirmed everything Marcus had said. "Active duty. Lieutenant Colonel. Highly decorated." The officer felt a chill run through him. He realized that not only was this man telling the truth, but this entire situation was spiraling into something far bigger than he or his partner had anticipated. When he returned, he looked uneasy. He glanced at the older officer, then at Marcus. His lips parted as if to speak, but before he could, the older man grabbed the documents out of his hand. He looked at them, scoffed, and tossed them back at Marcus. "Means nothing here," he said dismissively. The younger officer looked shocked. He opened his mouth as though he wanted to protest, but then shut it again, caught in the conflict between loyalty to his partner and loyalty to the truth. The crowd gasped. People shouted louder now, outraged. "This is wrong. He's military. We're filming everything." Marcus picked up his documents calmly, dusted them off, and placed them back into his wallet. He stood straight, his chin slightly lifted, embodying quiet strength. "I have nothing more to give you," he said, his voice calm but carrying. "I've shown proof. I've been respectful. If you continue this, it is no longer about the law, it is about something else." His words hit hard. The crowd clapped and cheered for him, their voices growing stronger, drowning out the noise of the patrol car's engine. The younger officer shifted nervously, realizing they were losing control of the narrative. The sun had now dipped low, and street lights began to flicker on. The scene had become larger than life, a decorated army officer standing tall against prejudice, a crowd rallying behind him, and two officers caught in the spotlight of accountability. Marcus knew this was not over. Something was building, something that would soon explode into national attention. He could feel it in the way people were recording, in the way whispers traveled through the crowd, in the way the younger officer looked at him with guilt in his eyes. He remained still, waiting for what came next. He had faced danger before in foreign lands. Now, he was facing it at home, not with weapons, but with patience, dignity, and the strength of truth. The night was just beginning, but the story was already taking a shape he could not have imagined. The night air grew heavier as the flashing lights continued to spin, drawing even more attention to the tense scene unfolding on the side of the road. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Johnson stood tall, his posture unshaken, even as the crowd grew larger and more restless. Dozens of eyes were on him, dozens of phones were raised high, capturing every second. He could almost feel the weight of those cameras, strangers recording his dignity and his struggle, determined to make sure the truth would not be hidden. The older officer still stood in front of him, his expression hard, but Marcus noticed something shift in the air. The younger officer, who had already confirmed his identity through the system, lingered a few steps behind, his eyes darting between Marcus, his partner, and the crowd. His face was pale, his lips tight, as though he wanted to speak but couldn't. Across the street, someone shouted, "He's a colonel in the army. Why are you treating him like this?" The words echoed, carried by the evening breeze. A group of teenagers added their voices, chanting softly, "Let him go. Let him go." Marcus remained still, his eyes calm but steady, his voice quiet yet strong when he finally spoke. "I have served this country in uniform for over 20 years. I've led soldiers, I've defended the flag, and I've risked my life overseas. And yet, here I stand, questioned and dismissed in my own land. Tell me, officer, what exactly am I guilty of tonight?" The silence that followed was thick. The crowd leaned in, their phones steady, capturing his words like they were part of history in the making. The younger officer flinched, his eyes lowering to the ground. The older one's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the patrol car, leaving Marcus standing by the roadside with the crowd buzzing louder. People began whispering about what they had just heard. The colonel's words weren't just words, they were heavy, filled with a lifetime of discipline, service, and sacrifice. A man in a business suit stepped forward from the crowd. His voice rang clear. "Colonel, don't worry, sir. We're with you. Everyone here sees what's happening." He held up his phone, making sure Marcus noticed. "We're recording every second. They can't hide this." Marcus gave a small nod, his expression calm. He wasn't a man who sought attention, but in this moment, he understood that the cameras were not just protecting him, they were protecting the truth. The older officer opened the door of the patrol car and leaned inside, speaking quickly into his radio. The younger one shifted on his feet, and for the first time, he spoke louder, almost as if his conscience had broken free. "Sir," he said to Marcus, "your information is valid. You shouldn't even be standing here this long. This isn't right." The crowd erupted with approval at his words. Some clapped, others cheered. The older officer turned around sharply, glaring at his partner. "Quiet," he snapped. But it was too late. The younger man's words had been heard, recorded, and shared instantly. Within minutes, those videos were flooding social media platforms. People across the country were watching a decorated army officer stand calmly under flashing lights, hearing him speak with quiet authority, and watching a young policeman admit that what was happening was wrong. Meanwhile, Marcus's phone buzzed inside his pocket. He hadn't touched it since the stop, but now, out of instinct, he pulled it out briefly. Messages were pouring in, friends, fellow officers, even junior soldiers from his base. Somehow, the video had already reached them. One text stood out, glowing on his screen: "Sir, the Pentagon has seen this." Marcus's breath caught for a moment, but his face remained composed. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. He knew now that the situation was no longer local. The weight of Washington was about to fall on this small roadside encounter. The crowd kept growing. Cars slowed down as drivers leaned out of windows to see what was happening. Some honked in support of Marcus. Others parked and joined the group, raising their phones. It was no longer a simple traffic stop. It had become a public standoff between truth and prejudice, between dignity and misuse of authority. Then, the younger officer stepped closer, lowering his voice but speaking clearly enough for the crowd to hear. "Sir, I apologize. I know who you are now. I've confirmed it. You shouldn't be here like this." Marcus met his eyes. For the first time that evening, he felt a glimmer of honesty shining through. He gave a small nod, his voice warm but firm. "Son, it's never too late to do the right thing. Courage isn't about a uniform. It's about speaking truth when it matters." The younger man swallowed hard, his eyes filled with conflict, but also a spark of respect. The older officer returned from the patrol car, his face tight, his hand gripping his radio. "Backup is on the way," he muttered, his tone sharp. But even as he spoke, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Not local patrol cars this time, but government vehicles, darker and more serious. Two black SUVs pulled up smoothly, their headlights cutting through the crowd. Doors opened, and out stepped men and women in formal attire. They carried themselves with authority, their earpieces visible. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "That's federal." Marcus recognized them instantly. They were military representatives and federal security officials, likely sent directly after the Pentagon had been alerted. The air shifted instantly. This was no longer a local matter, it was national. The federal officials moved with quiet speed. One of them approached Marcus, saluted, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Colonel Johnson, sir. We've been sent to escort you. The department has been informed." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The people recording widened their eyes. The young officer straightened in shock. The older one's face lost its confidence entirely, his expression caught between disbelief and fear. Marcus returned the salute with dignity, his calm voice carrying across the silence. "Thank you." The crowd erupted in cheers. Some shouted words of support: "We stand with you, Colonel. Justice will be served. This isn't over." Marcus looked at the crowd, then back at the officers. His gaze lingered on the younger one for a moment. "Remember what I said," he told him softly. "Courage is about truth." The young man nodded slowly, his jaw tight, as though he had just received a lesson he would never forget. As Marcus prepared to leave with the federal officials, his phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, from a superior at the Pentagon. The words were short but heavy: "We're handling this. Justice will be swift." Marcus knew what that meant. This incident had gone beyond the roadside, beyond the crowd, beyond even the state. It had become a matter for the entire nation. And as he stepped into the black SUV, with the crowd cheering behind him and the flashing lights still spinning, he realized that what had begun as a routine drive home had now turned into a spark that would ignite conversations across the country. Conversations about respect, about dignity, about service, and about truth. The black SUV moved steadily through the streets, its tinted windows reflecting the flashing lights behind them. Inside, Colonel Marcus Johnson sat with a quiet, measured composure. His military training had taught him discipline, patience, and awareness, and now every sense was alert. He knew that this was no ordinary escort. The Pentagon had already been alerted, and the presence of federal agents signaled that this incident had become far more serious than a simple roadside confrontation. The agents around him were professional, their movements precise, their eyes scanning the environment with careful attention. Marcus observed them for a moment, noting the efficiency and calm authority with which they handled the situation. It reminded him of his years leading troops overseas, how leadership and control could change the outcome of even the most tense encounters. Outside, the city continued its usual rhythm, though now it was punctuated by the sounds of distant sirens and the soft hum of curious crowds. People were gathering on sidewalks, whispering among themselves, recording with their phones. Social media had already caught fire with videos of the earlier confrontation. By now, millions across the country had seen the calm, composed figure of Colonel Johnson, standing his ground while the officers hesitated and faltered. The story was no longer local, it was national. As the SUV slowed near a secure government facility, Marcus's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He retrieved it and saw a series of messages, first from his superiors, then from colleagues, and even from close friends. One message from a senior official read, "Colonel, the situation is delicate. The Pentagon is mobilizing all necessary channels. Your safety and integrity are our top priorities." Marcus smiled faintly. After years of service, he was used to command, to responsibility, but there was a certain reassurance in knowing that his reputation and dedication were recognized at the highest levels. He placed the phone down and looked around the SUV again. The agents, silent and focused, seemed to share an unspoken understanding: the night ahead would require careful action. Meanwhile, at the scene of the roadside confrontation, the younger officer remained, his mind in turmoil. He had never faced a situation like this before. Initially confident, he had quickly realized the gravity of the moment, the weight of the colonel's words, and the undeniable authority that Marcus carried. Now, with federal agents arriving and backup from the Pentagon mobilized, he felt both relief and guilt. Relief that the situation was being handled correctly, and guilt for his own earlier hesitation and misjudgment. Across the crowd, people continued to discuss the events, replaying the videos over and over. Conversations filled the air, some shocked, some inspired, some questioning how such a confrontation could happen in the first place. Parents held their children close, whispering lessons about courage, respect, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Marcus's calm demeanor and measured words had left a deep impression, not just on the officers but on every person who had witnessed him that evening. Back inside the SUV, Marcus finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational, yet carried a weight that commanded attention. "It's strange," he said, "how quickly ordinary moments can become tests of character. One wrong assumption, one moment of hesitation, and the consequences can ripple far beyond what we imagine." One of the federal agents, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady presence, glanced at him. "Sir, your actions today have set an example. The right thing is being done now, but what you did, your patience, your composure, it won't be forgotten." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I've learned that the truth has a voice of its own. Sometimes it takes patience to let it be heard. But when it is, people notice. That's all that matters." The SUV arrived at the secure facility, a building with reinforced walls, guarded entrances, and a flurry of activity inside. Security personnel moved with purpose, recognizing the significance of the situation. Marcus was escorted inside, each step measured, each motion precise. The agents flanking him communicated quietly through earpieces, coordinating with others who were already inside the building. Inside, the room was a mix of calm and urgency. Officials from various departments were gathered: military advisors, intelligence officers, and legal representatives. Screens displayed the videos from the roadside incident, social media streams, and real-time updates from law enforcement agencies. The atmosphere was tense but controlled, a careful balance between authority and action. Marcus stood at the center, calm and observant, as the officials approached him. One of them, a senior advisor, extended a hand. Colonel Johnson, thank you for your patience and for handling yourself with such dignity. The videos have already made an impact across multiple channels. People are responding to your leadership and calmness. Marcus acknowledged the words with a nod. Thank you. I only did what I thought was right. The concern now should be ensuring that this does not happen again, that protocols are clear, and that respect is maintained across all interactions. A young officer who had been monitoring the social media feeds spoke up. Sir, the response has been overwhelming. Citizens are calling, posting, and sharing their support. There's a national conversation beginning because of what happened tonight. Marcus allowed a small, approving smile. That conversation is important. It's about more than me, it's about accountability, fairness, and understanding. If even one person learns from this incident, then the moment was worth it. Outside the facility, the city continued its restless energy. News crews had arrived, drawn by the publicized videos. Anchors were reporting on the roadside confrontation, emphasizing the calm demeanor of the colonel and the hesitation of the local officers. The story had taken on a life of its own, igniting discussions about law enforcement, respect for service members, and the importance of transparency. Back inside, officials began discussing the next steps. Legal protocols, departmental reviews, and federal oversight were all on the table. Marcus listened carefully, contributing insights where necessary. He spoke of the importance of training, of recognizing authority, and of maintaining composure even in the most stressful situations. His words were measured, precise, and informed by decades of experience both in the military and in dealing with sensitive situations. After several hours, a senior Pentagon official entered the room. His presence commanded attention immediately. He approached Marcus and saluted. Colonel, your actions tonight have been exemplary. The department has reviewed the situation and will take swift, decisive action to ensure accountability. We are committed to upholding standards and protecting those who serve. Marcus returned the salute, his expression composed yet proud. I appreciate that. It's important that trust is maintained between service members, law enforcement, and the community. That trust is fragile, and it must be protected. As the night wore on, updates continued to pour in. The younger officer from the roadside incident had been placed under review, his actions documented, and statements collected. The older officer, who had initiated the stop, was under immediate internal investigation. The process was meticulous, transparent, and thorough, a clear signal that accountability would not be delayed or ignored. Meanwhile, Marcus took a moment to reflect. He had spent decades serving his country, and he had always believed in fairness, respect, and integrity. Tonight had tested those beliefs in ways he had never anticipated. Yet, despite the tension, the fear, and the uncertainty, he felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because he had been proven right, but because the truth had been heard, because the system, though imperfect, was beginning to respond as it should. The federal agents and officials were impressed by his composure. They remarked privately that Marcus had handled himself with remarkable patience and dignity. His ability to remain calm under pressure, to communicate clearly, and to set an example for others was nothing short of extraordinary. By the time the sun began to rise, the situation was under control. Statements had been recorded, investigations were underway, and the initial incident was now firmly in the hands of the federal authorities. Marcus, exhausted but composed, stepped outside briefly, letting the morning air wash over him. The city was quiet now, the early commuters beginning their day, unaware of the historical moment that had unfolded just hours before. Marcus's phone buzzed once more. A message from a trusted colleague read, "You've made a difference. Not just tonight, but in how people will think about integrity and courage moving forward." He smiled faintly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Indeed, this night would be remembered, not for fear, anger, or conflict, but for the courage, composure, and dignity of one man who refused to be intimidated or silenced. The morning sun was just beginning to stretch its light over the city when Colonel Marcus Johnson stepped out of the secure building. The air was crisp, and for the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, feeling the weight of the previous night lift slightly. The streets were quiet now, and a few early commuters glanced curiously at the large federal vehicles parked nearby, but the tension that had filled the city hours earlier had begun to ease. Marcus walked steadily, flanked by federal agents who had been with him since the SUV had arrived. They had become a team overnight, bound not by friendship, but by a shared mission and a sense of duty. Marcus respected them. They were professionals, like him, committed to doing what was right even in difficult circumstances. As he reached the steps of the facility, his phone buzzed. A message from the Pentagon appeared: "Your patience and composure have made a significant impact. Expect a briefing at 10 a.m. regarding next steps and official statements. You have set a national example." Marcus smiled faintly. This was not about recognition, he reminded himself. It was about accountability, integrity, and ensuring that others learned from what had happened. Inside the facility, a meeting was already underway. Senior officials, legal advisors, and military officers were gathered, reviewing reports, analyzing video footage, and planning a path forward. Marcus took his place at the center of the room, calm and attentive. The discussion began immediately, focusing on both the short-term consequences and the broader implications of the incident. One advisor spoke first, outlining the steps that would be taken regarding the officers involved. Internal reviews, retraining programs, and federal oversight were all planned. "Colonel Johnson, your actions have highlighted the importance of proper training and awareness. We will ensure this incident leads to meaningful change," the advisor said. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "It's not just about punishment or accountability," he replied. "It's about understanding, respect, and preventing future mistakes. One moment of misunderstanding can create lasting damage. I hope this becomes a learning experience for everyone involved." The room was silent for a moment, each person reflecting on his words. There was an unusual gravity in the air, a sense that this event had touched something deeper than procedure or protocol. It was about human behavior, about courage, and about making choices in moments of stress. As the briefing continued, social media updates and news reports were displayed on screens around the room. Citizens across the nation were reacting to the videos from the roadside incident. People were sharing messages of support for Marcus, praising his calmness, his composure, and the way he had stood up for what was right. Parents were using the event as a teaching moment for their children, emphasizing the values of courage, respect, and patience. One of the legal advisors spoke up. "Colonel, we are also preparing an official statement to address the public. It will highlight the actions taken, the accountability measures, and the importance of integrity in law enforcement. We want your voice included." Marcus nodded. "I will speak, but I want to emphasize one thing: this is not about me. It's about fairness, justice, and making sure that respect is maintained in every interaction. That is the message that needs to be heard." Hours passed as the team worked meticulously to coordinate the official statements, ensure proper legal procedures were followed, and prepare for the nationwide attention that was sure to follow. Marcus remained composed, offering insight and guidance, careful to stay focused on the larger purpose rather than the personal recognition he was receiving. Outside, the city was beginning to stir. People who had stayed up late watching the news or following social media posts were now heading to work, to school, or simply continuing their daily routines. Yet, there was a noticeable change in the air. Conversations had shifted. People were talking about integrity, respect, and the courage it took to stand firm in difficult situations. Marcus's actions had sparked a larger dialogue, one that extended far beyond the immediate incident. At the same time, the officers involved were being formally questioned, their statements documented, and their actions reviewed. The younger officer, who had initially confronted Marcus, was guided through a process designed to educate and correct rather than simply punish. The older officer, whose misjudgment had escalated the situation, faced more serious scrutiny, but the focus remained on accountability and learning rather than mere retribution. The official statement was eventually prepared. It emphasized the importance of respect, proper training, and understanding authority. It praised the calm and professional actions of Colonel Johnson while outlining the steps taken to ensure that similar incidents would be handled appropriately in the future. Marcus read the statement carefully, making minor adjustments to ensure that the tone remained educational and constructive. When the statement was finally released to the public, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Citizens expressed gratitude for the transparency, respect for Marcus's composure, and hope that this moment would lead to real change. Social media posts flooded with messages of support, retelling the story in ways that highlighted courage, integrity, and the importance of standing firm in challenging situations. In the afternoon, Marcus was invited to address a gathering of law enforcement officers, military personnel, and community leaders. He spoke with a calm authority, sharing his perspective on what had occurred, the lessons learned, and the importance of empathy, patience, and respect in every interaction. His words were simple but powerful, resonating deeply with those who were listening. "Every encounter we have," he said, "carries weight. Every action, every choice, can create a ripple effect. What we do in moments of stress reflects who we are, and it shapes the way others see us. Courage is not always about action, sometimes, it is about patience. Sometimes, it is about listening and understanding before reacting." The audience listened intently. Officers nodded in agreement, community leaders made notes, and some even expressed a quiet, reflective emotion. Marcus's words were more than guidance, they were a lesson in character, discipline, and humanity. As the day drew to a close, Marcus returned to his home, a sense of relief settling over him. He reflected on the events of the past 24 hours, the confrontation, the tense standoff, the arrival of federal agents, and the nationwide attention. He felt proud not because of the recognition he had received, but because the right actions had been taken, because a meaningful conversation had begun, and because the moment had highlighted the importance of integrity and respect. His family welcomed him home, relieved to see him safe. They had watched the events unfold on television and social media, feeling a mix of fear and pride. Marcus smiled at them, feeling the warmth of home, the comfort of safety, and the strength of those bonds that had been tested but never broken. That evening, Marcus reflected on the broader implications. The incident had revealed weaknesses in training, in awareness, and in communication, but it had also demonstrated the power of composure, knowledge, and ethical behavior. It was a reminder that leadership was not always about orders or authority, it was about example, about patience, and about making choices that honor both duty and humanity. Across the country, the story continued to spread. Schools used it as an example in ethics classes. Law enforcement agencies incorporated it into training programs. Citizens shared it as a tale of courage and patience in the face of misunderstanding. Marcus's actions had created ripples that reached far beyond his own experience, influencing countless others and creating a foundation for future conversations about respect, accountability, and integrity. In the quiet of his home, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the officers, the agents, the officials, and the citizens who had witnessed the events. He thought about how easily fear, misunderstanding, or hesitation could escalate situations, and how important it was to remain calm, composed, and committed to what is right. He picked up his phone once more. Messages of support continued to arrive, but Marcus's focus was not on recognition. Instead, he drafted a short message for public release. "Tonight reminded us that integrity matters. Patience matters. Respect matters. Let us all strive to act with dignity, even in challenging moments. That is how we build trust, understanding, and a better future together." Sending the message, he leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. The events of the past day had been intense, but they had also been meaningful. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that actions rooted in patience, composure, and ethical behavior could have a profound impact. And as the city settled into night once again, with lights glowing softly across the skyline, the story of Colonel Marcus Johnson, his courage, his calm, and his integrity became a beacon of hope and a reminder to all. One man's steady actions had sparked a national conversation, influenced countless lives, and reminded the country of the power of dignity, patience, and respect.